So, hi, Khurshed. Welcome to hashtag Lee Rogers Meets. How are you?
Thank you, Lee. I'm very well, thank you. Just had a couple of days relief from standing in front of the screen over Easter, so that's been really good for the energy levels. And I'm recently vaccinated, so walking around feeling like a bit of a superhero at the moment. I'm not sure that'll last, but that's certainly how I am at the moment. So all good, thank you.
Amazing. So just to explain to people watching this, we interacted on LinkedIn and there was some discussion about connections, and the whole reason Lee Rogers Meets came around was actually just connecting with people and in their line of work from where we necessarily wouldn't meet in person together actually, but virtually gives us an opportunity to do that. And the more I've reached out, the more people have kind of responded. And I guess some of your curiosity was around, well, how's it been and how's that kind of formulated? And people in this series, we spoke to the likes of Professor Damien Hughes, we spoke to Simone Riley, a radio presenter, award-winning, and now yourself. And I guess what I'm really interested for today's talk is thinking about, I guess, the pandemic in the here and now and your experiences personally and the people you work with and in your work generally. And then we'll go on to in the second part of it about, well, how do we kind of navigate our way through this safely moving forward and what's on your mind in that area? So just talk to us then a little bit about what your experience has been like and the impact that has been there in COVID and, mentally, how's that been for you?
So I think in common with everyone else, it's just been one big experiment, a massive worldwide social experiment. So for ourselves, our clients, everyone that we work with, we were thrown into the unknown, just like everyone else. And I wasn't sure quite what to expect in terms of work activity. At some level, I thought everything might just stop and get a bit paralyzed, but actually people moved across to the digital world very, very quickly. And so we've been just as busy in the past year, probably actually a little bit more busy than the year before, which was a surprise to me, but it's allowed me to really get a kind of behind the curtains look at organizational life. The people we work with are typically senior executives in large listed businesses. And so the work with them has continued, and that's where a lot of my insight and learning has come from. And then, of course, combined with what my personal experiences of the lockdown as well. And I think one of the things that started to become obvious after a few weeks, so post the initial excitement, post the initial adrenaline fueled, oh my gosh, we have to do something differently, which I think was in some ways, I know it sounds a bit odd considering just how tragic the situation was for a lot of people. But I think in the corporate world, if you weren't personally affected by ill health, there was a bit of creative excitement engendered by the change in working circumstance. And after that period was over, I think we started to realize that the initial euphoria about, oh my word, maybe the world of work will completely change and maybe everything will be done digitally from now on, and maybe we just don't need offices, and maybe we never have to return to that kind of environment. After that initial phase, I think there was a slow but growing realization that feels much more embedded now in the corporate psyche, that there's something about being together in person rather than over a screen that enables us to exchange energy. I don't know how or why that happens. It's the best description I can come up with for now. But there's some kind of energy exchange in person that cannot be replicated. And so as a result, I think people started to both accept the world of work was changing and come to appreciate in a new way, I guess, just what the power and benefit of meeting in person was. And so that was a kind of macro level shift over the first few months as we were working with people that we noticed. Does that make sense to you as I say it?
It doesn't. I resonate with that 100%.
Yeah. And then I think over time, some of the harder work that we've encountered with our clients and with ourselves is, I think in hindsight, I'm rationalizing it as this experience has been somewhat traumatizing, and it's a big and sometimes scary word, trauma. It's not one that I want to use lightly or to diminish people's experiences of trauma outside of the the pandemic we're going through. But if you take some of the kind of core constituents of what causes trauma, in essence, whatever the environment might be, it's a sense that comes as a consequence of feeling as if you are in danger, and at the most extreme levels that your life is in danger, and that you're exposed to that environment on a constant basis. So it's not just a quick thing that then disappears, but that you get a regular impact of this threat, of this environmental threat, whatever it might be and wherever it might be surfacing. And so I think one of the ways of thinking about the time we've just been through is that there has been this message over and over and over again that your life is in danger, and the life of the people you love is in danger, and you have to be really careful and cautious. And I think that in itself is a traumatizing message. Does that sound too much in terms of the way I've described it, or does it land in your experience?
It lands in my experience, and what's just been brought to the front and center of my mind is I remember bringing my elderly neighbour's bin in, and for the first time, like the hairs on the back of my neck stood up as I'd seen the bin, the refuge collectors kind of take the rubbish out, and the bin was left, and I remember kind of holding the handles, and then I felt just a fear for the first time in my life about the bin. Now, I've talked about this on radio. I've always quite enjoyed seeing refuse collectors do it just as a rite of passage as a young boy. But then taking Mary's bin in, I was like, this could be the moment. This could be the moment where I contract the virus.
Yeah.
And I could be laid low. And it was just because, like, I think you talked about it in the first instance about being heightened. Now, what I would say is subsequently that is absolutely weaned off. Yeah. And then having been vaccinated, there's probably more rational thought and process on a deeply personal level. Yes. And then as organizations, and you've got more exposure clearly in working with a number of clients, but it's then how do organizations then adapt to that more rational thinking over the period of time? That absolutely resonates.
Yeah. And I think one of the other factors, in addition to the environmental threat that we were experiencing that caused even more difficulty, was that one of the things that would typically insulate us against that threat was being denied us, and in essence, that being relationships, or the breadth and depth of relationships that we'd had. And so I've always believed, and I think this past year has really reinforced my belief, that community, connection, relationship has a kind of protective power, an insulating power that, particularly against psychological threat, can be a very strong defense. And so, unfortunately, we weren't able to look after ourselves as best as we might have been able to because of the other consequence of this pandemic, which was separation and lockdown and disconnection. And so as a result, over time, I think what I've noticed in our work and just generally observing the life around me is that the ties that bind us have over time, over this past year, become weaker to a large extent. Now, there are some lovely examples, like the example of you helping your neighbour, that have shown community at its best. But if I look at it through the widest lens, I think there has been an impact on our family cultures, on our neighbourhood cultures, and in our workplace cultures, that the ties that bind us are somewhat weakened as a result of this past year. So when I put all of that together, I think there are some very definite signs and symptoms that we've been picking up in our coaching work and in our facilitation work. And I can certainly identify with some of these personally as well. There's, I guess, at the lowest grade, this fatigue of always being sensitive to the threat. Now, even if in our rational minds we're saying to ourselves, we're okay, we're protected, it's very unlikely anything will happen, I'm taking precautions, I don't think that's managed to protect against the underlying sense of having to be hypersensitive all the time and keep ourselves safe. And so I think that with that comes a sense of fatigue. Of course, this is compounded with a different way of working, the fatigue that comes from boredom of repetition and lack of change in environment. All of that I think is inherent as just as a base effect that is impacting everyone that we work with. And then I think beyond that, it kind of grades upwards in terms of severity. And so we've seen a lot of symptoms ranging from people not being able to concentrate to the same level, loss of sleep, which again contributes to the fatigue, a sense in which people don't feel as capable in making decisions to the speed and quality that they might have been used to, a sense in which people don't feel that they're as able to play as useful a part in their organizational lives as they have been to date. Just an overall sense of just the loss of some vitality, some confidence, some potency over the year that we've been working together. And at the mild level of that, people can recognize it, talk about it, get some support, work it through, make sense of it and find their way through. At the more severe end, I think there are signs and symptoms we've seen of, slightly crudely, people at the top of organizations and in teams just losing it for relatively trivial reasons. When you look back on it and you look and you think that, the reaction to that was just an overreaction. The reaction to that was unnecessarily large. And I think inside the context we've just described, I can understand it. There's a with the hypersensitivity comes a hyper-reactivity to the environment, the relationships, the conversations we're having.
And for you then, your personal experience of those symptoms that you've described, which ones do you resonate with the most in terms of your work, family life over this period?
Yeah, I think definitely this one about ties being weakened, so a loss of connection and a loss of the benefit that comes with that. I noticed myself, it's not that I've ever been a big kind of extroverted personality. I'm not that. I'm very comfortable in my own company and in my own head and thinking things through. But I've noticed that that's become quite an extreme way of being. And if I'm not careful, it can just push me right down to the other end of the spectrum, where it becomes a bit of, slightly misanthropic in terms of I just don't want anything to do with anyone, right? Just I'll keep my head down, I'll take care of my immediate family and just leave me alone. That sounds a bit extreme as I say it, but you get the idea. It has that kind of sentiment and energy about it. And of course, then that becomes a bit of a vicious cycle, because if you believe what I expressed earlier in terms of the power of community, which I do, then that can feed itself. So the isolation then feeds the unhappiness then feeds a sense of depression or lack of confidence or worthlessness, and that just kind of triggers its way down. So I've definitely had a bit of that going on, and had to take kind of active action to lift myself out of it, to force myself to reconnect and come back into contact with people, for sure.
And what's that look like on a real practical level?
I think it's finding an internal energy to just make the first move. By make the first move, I mean send the text, pick up the phone, make the call, arrange for a walk, whatever it might be. It seems to take a disproportionate amount of energy to make that first movement. Once that's done, I think the momentum then takes care of itself, and the positive effect feeds itself as well. So there's a lot in just finding and pushing myself to just energetically go, get on with it, do something, don't just let yourself keep slipping. I think the other impact is, and we haven't got the time and space, I don't think, to go into the detail of this, but one of the reasons I got into this work was from a series of personal experiences of trauma well beyond and before the pandemic. And so one of the other impacts on me, I think, is to just keep an eye on myself is the new environment now triggering some of the old reactions and some of the old symptoms and some of the old difficulties that I've been working hard at recovering from. I think I've been okay by and large on that score, but it's been important for me to just keep a good close eye on it at the same time as well.
Great, and I think out of that self-awareness is really important. I definitely am on the other side of the spectrum, probably in terms of introversion, extroversion, tend to be more extroverted. Been known to, not my words, but other people's words, of danger dial people, and kind of it's that. I guess it's that balance, actually. But then not feeding off people for a year.
Yeah,
is then tiring, because I think you've described it as, where do you get your energy from, or where do you keep the checks and balances with that? So I've been for a walk just to wave to people and things like that, and a smile, and actually I found that really liberating.
Yeah, I bet.
But and probably actually I didn't think of it like this, but now you mention it, it is that sense of community, that there's something beyond a four walls, a laptop screen.
Yeah. And also the power of the exchange as well, as you say, the walk, even just the exchange of a smile, that's an exchange of some kind of energy that I think lifts us and protects us and keeps us well. So it's interesting that you've been focusing on that as a simple practice, to keep yourself well. I think it's really important. I don't think I realized, maybe I shouldn't speak for everyone, I don't think I realized just how much power there was in those small exchanges.
So then moving forward, then we've mentioned some of the symptoms around the impact, I guess, both psychological and for organisations and personally of the pandemic. Yeah. What does a healthy return look like? What's on your mind for individuals and for yourself as we transition out?
Yeah, I think one of the things at a macro level, particularly senior executives have got to just be a little bit careful of, is the way we talk about this next phase as lockdown is released and as people start to come back out again. And I hear it with some of my clients, and I don't think they mean it in any kind of consciously judgmental way, but the language used is often about, we need to get people back to work. And I think there's a unintended implication in that, which is us implying that you haven't been working while we've been in lockdown. You haven't been working while you've been at home, in essence. And being very conscious about how we talk and the language we use, the vocabulary we use, is important, because that will immediately set us off on the wrong foot. You can imagine, you know how hard you've been working. I know how hard I've been working. If we're on the receiving end of that kind of message, even if it's not consciously intended, you tend to think, screw you. It's kind of like you lose people's commitment and energy and engagement very quickly. So it sounds trivial, but I don't think it is. I think the way we talk about this next phase is going to be really, really important. And then beyond that, I think we have to go slowly. There is again a kind of build up of pressure, understandably, because we've been away for a while from the physical workspace, to benefit from the release of energy that will come in people being back together, if you like, physically back together. And we just need to go a little bit slowly, because if you accept what I outlined before in terms of the potential traumatizing effect of the pandemic and the restrictions, then it's going to take a little while. So people don't just snap back from that kind of environment. They need to go slowly and carefully and thoughtfully. The essence of the people that we were over a year ago at our best in terms of being confident and curious and calm, and I don't think that's going to come straight away. I think there's going to be a tentative approach needed, and people will be, again, hypersensitive to risk. Even if in their rational minds everything should be okay, in their emotional minds there will be a sense of, hold on, I'm now going to be back in commuting in large crowds in small spaces, working within large groups in relatively small spaces, I'm not sure about the ventilation setup, you know, et cetera, et cetera. It's kind of like there's a lot that will be going on in people's minds that we just have to be conscious of, thoughtful about, sensitive to. And I think most importantly, and again, this goes a bit against the corporate grain, but I think people are generally doing a good job on it, is to give people choice and let them feel the power of making their own decisions in terms of pace and movement, and to listen really hard to what they're saying about their experience, both as it's been over the past year and in the transition, and then as a new rhythm gets established. I think if we don't do that, we're likely to trigger anger, some sense of not being heard, and then potentially a kind of rejection of organizations or the leadership of the organizations that are doing their best to re-establish a new working practice. So yeah, thoughtful, slow, high on the listening, and the capacity to test and learn and adjust as we go. You know, this is a learning process for us all. None of us have been here before. This is a once in a generation moment, and with it comes some of those good principles around any experiment, which is slow, small probes into how we work, and then we'll learn from those and take the learning and make some more adjustments, and then go around that cycle again.
And I have heard other people, as well as kind of the psychological return, if you like, it is almost the justification is the way I'm going to phrase it of, I managed to work in whichever capacity, to whichever degree for 12 months, for a full year.
Yes.
New things have come in, new ways of working have happened. And now what you're asking me to do is actually to transition back to something that was.
Yes. And so I think what I'm hearing in most of my client base is an acceptance that this, what we're calling this hybrid way of working, is here. So I don't think there is too much of a, we will go back exactly to the way things were. And at the same time, there is a growing sense in which offices are not going to disappear, or physical workspaces where people gather are not going to disappear. So some combination of the two is the likely future for most of the people I speak to. And I think over time, what we've got to work out is what's the best of both. What has been the best of this remote experience that's allowed people to have a better quality of life as a consequence, and what is the best of us being back in community physically as well. And I think there is a lot of hope there and a lot of creativity there if we can tap into it, because if you accept what I was saying earlier, that weak ties damage cultures, then physically being together strengthens those ties and should strengthen our cultures. And it is one of the things we need to be a little bit careful of with this hybrid way of working, which is that if we're not going to get the strengthening that comes from being in the same place at the same time as much as we were before, then how are we going to adjust for that? How are we going to compensate for some of that? To my mind, there isn't any doubt that communities create cultures, and those communities are much, much harder to build if we're not physically together. Doesn't mean to say we have to be together all the time, but it's a component of work life that I don't think is going to disappear. And maybe to end on an optimistic note, accepting all of the kind of shadow of this that I described earlier, I am just starting to get, even just over the past couple of weeks, the kind of bubbling up in the conversations I'm having of the potential excitement in this, the potential creativity that's coming our way. And I think I can draw a connection to what happens to people in other environments post a traumatic experience, which is that it can be very difficult for a lot of people, and it can provide an opening for more growth in the individual's psychological resilience, a different relationship to the meaning in their life, in this case, different relationship potentially to the meaning in our work, a new strength that comes with that, a sense of greater appreciation for what we have and who we are and the lives that we're living. There's often a heightened empathy for other people and the struggles that they're experiencing themselves. And I guess maybe the final thing to say is that there's this bubbling up of a sense of wanting to come back into contact, wanting to deepen our connection with each other. And from the kind of belief system that I come from, that can only be a good thing. Yeah.
Oh, brilliant. And I resonate with so much, and I agree. I think the optimism is definitely there, and I think how people process that, as you said, will be kind of individual, and it may take others more time to get to that space. But I do get a sense of that kind of holistically, from a number of people across different disciplines, lifestyles, industries, not just in the corporate world, actually. I really appreciate your time. I know you're a busy guy, and thank you for being a guest on Lee Rogers Meets.
Really enjoyed it, Lee. Take care of yourself.
All right, you too. Thank you.
Bye for now.